to the economy, it's also about the contributions they make to the community. Sporting teams, scouting movements, volunteer organizations, Big Brothers, Kinsmen, all these people are the backbone of these organizations. And if they have no job here and have to leave, who will carry the torch for these associations? We all know of businesses give back to their local communities, particularly small rural communities. We all know of businesses that sponsor local teams, help employ students and youth, and raise money for local initiatives. All in addition to providing jobs for people in their area. With first contract arbitration threatening to drive them out of businesses, it also threatens the communities in which they operate. What about the kind of businesses that people have come to truly rely on? What about communities that only have gas stations and or pharmacies for miles? What if they're forced to close shop because of devastating first contract imposed upon them? Imagine what that would mean to people in the community. Let's use pharmacies for an example. We know that in many communities, pharmacists are actually the first medical professional on call for elderly or children. What if the local pharmacy in a small rural community is forced to close because the first contract is imposed on them? The consequences could be dire. Not only would lose their expertise, but they could have to drive miles to get their services that they need and deserve. Another issue is the misleading title of the bill, an act to prevent unnecessary labour disruptions and protect the economy. This is a title that would be laughable if the situation was not so serious. Protect the economy? Just how does this legislation do that? Protecting the economy would mean tackling the HST. It would mean take real action on out-of-control energy costs and rewriting the bite-the-bullet energy plan. Not moving forward with more anti-business, job-killing policies. We could talk about energy, coal, how we could use coal to put people back to work. I would like to see the government explain to the members of the business community who have made their concerns known exactly how the piece of legislation protects the economy. Maybe it's supposed to protect the economy in New Brunswick or Alberta. Is that the intent? Because it certainly doesn't protect the economy in Nova Scotia. And if the government thinks it does, it's time to get their heads out of the sand. It seems to me, Mr. Speaker, this government has never taken the economy seriously. The idea that they know is a farce. First contract arbitration will only hinder the economy in Nova Scotia. It will drive away jobs and prevent new ones from coming here. Earlier I spoke about Nova Scotia's new shipbuilding opportunity and what it means for our province. It's so important that we get this right. We need to do everything we can to turn the economy and boost it into a long economic engine. The way we do this is by using this opportunity to grow the economy and bring new offset businesses here. Businesses that will be able to stay here for the next number of generations. First contract arbitration impedes all the work and makes it harder to make them a reality. Perhaps one of the most offensive aspects of this bill lies in the timing of its introduction. After all, only a few short weeks ago, Nova Scotians rejoiced when they heard the Irving shipyards at Halifax would receive the $25 billion contract. This announcement was supposed to build a foundation for Nova Scotia to grow long into the future with no end in sight to the new jobs created and the economic spin-offs that would accompany it. However, now all of a sudden it's been rocked with uncertainty due to the NDP's first contract arbitration. Our leader has said it best. All this legislation does is raise a red flag over Nova Scotia. It tells businesses it's a risky place to invest. And are we really going to make the most of our new shipbuilding opportunity when we're not getting the full benefits out of our new businesses? New jobs and other positive economic spin-offs will provide. The answer is pretty clear. We don't think so. The government can try and hide as much as they want, but the truth is first contract arbitration is a job killer. Not only does it dissuade new businesses from setting up shop in a region but it also presents significant challenges for all ones already in operation. These challenges can have devastating effects on the job creators and the employees. In many cases, they can even result in the business closing and jobs being lost. There's no two ways about it. It's a job killer, plain and simple. This legislation is going to make it harder for all of us to promote Nova Scotia across the country and internationally. And this is really important. Unfortunately, first contract arbitration dilutes what could have been a very powerful message. Before the government introduced this legislation, we could have traveled the world saying, ships start here in Nova Scotia and we're open for business. But because of first contract arbitration, we're no longer able to say this with gusto. The government doesn't want Nova Scotia to be open for business. They don't want to attract new people and new investors. They appear content to allow us to squander the historic opportunity. In the PC caucus, we're not. That's why we'll be fighting this bad legislation at each and every step of the way. We need job creation and ways to protect jobs. We have it now. We don't want to lose this, and we're going to fight this legislation. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my seat.
The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's with great pleasure. I say great pleasure and probably a little bit of apprehension that I'm standing up today to speak on Bill 102. As a small business owner in the past, before I get involved in politics, I'd be very concerned about this bill. Very concerned. I've talked in the legislature before about the economic climate under this NDP government in the past a couple of times, and I've been labeled by some of the government members as a member of gloom and doom. Well, I think that's a compliment because they've really listened to me, and maybe they'll understand when they go to the polls the next time and the guys on the back bench over there and they're not here anymore, and understand what I was talking about when that happens. I've been here a long time, and I can tell you I've seen a lot of people come and go here. So, you know, when you look at the bill, in the face of the bill, it doesn't look too bad. It's first contract arbitration. Ideally, when a new union is set up, which Bill 100 allowed to have Bill 100 set up for this bill. So on the previous day, and when this bill moves forward, it will allow the first contract to be negotiated. Well, as a business owner at the time, depends who the arbitrator is, how well this will work. I'm not convinced that an arbitrator will be too friendly to an employer necessarily, and they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be friendly either to a union. They should be totally unbiased, and unfortunately that doesn't happen too often. And how are they going to compare the wages of one business to another business? They're going to go outside and say, well, you know, in Alberta they make $35 an hour, and the people here make $10 an hour, so that's fine. We'll pay them $25 an hour. So instantly the company is probably going to be out of business. So there's a lot of things that really affect this. And some of my colleagues have already talked about the high cost of power in Nova Scotia. It's gone up to 36.2% over since 2000, and there's 2 more increases coming. So that's going to make us less competitive in Nova Scotia. So when you look at competitiveness, and it really is important to a business. If you can't compete, you've got to compete financially. You've got to compete on the basis that you have a superior or equal product, and you also have to compete on the basis of performance. So if you say you're going to deliver a product on a time, at a price, well, number one thing, the customer wants it on time, they want it on budget, and they want top quality. And sometimes when a company is bogged down in, especially a small company, and if they have a union shop, and there's nothing wrong with a union shop as long as it's mutually agreed to, and now with Bill 100 you don't have to do that anymore, it just sort of can happen. But when you set the first contract, and say what if you're partway through a major project and all of a sudden there's a first contract arbitration put in place, and the first contract arbitration decides, well, now, instead of your employees making $20 an hour, they're going to make $26 an hour. Doesn't sound like too bad, does it? Not too bad, only $6 an hour more. But in reality, you've got to charge that extra $6 out at $18. You've got to charge 3 times what that cost you. So now you've got a problem. You've got a problem. Partway through a contract, probably can't finish it. And then what do? You call your banker up and say, well, look, take my business because I can't finish this contract. I'm going to go bankrupt. Well, that's not really a good idea. You call your customer up, say, well, I'm going to put the price up because, you know, first contract arbitration was in our facility, and, you know, they put the wages up, and we can't finish the contract. What we quoted, we need more money. Well, hopefully they had that negotiated in the contract, but I can tell you, any customer that is worth their salt would not have that built in the contract. They wouldn't take that kind of chance. They definitely would not. So then what's the business owner going to be faced with? Well, maybe he's far enough along in the project that it's not going to kill his company. They could probably have to go for a loss, would be a loss if that's the case. But then what do you have to do past that? Then you decide, is it worthwhile continuing with this type of work in this province? And I talked before about in other provinces of this country, this beautiful country that we live in, they're more competitive. So more competitive means many, many things, like I talked about already. Again, it's labor quality, price of your product, and also whether you can deliver or not, and if indeed you have a really solid company with really solid employees. And that's really the factor. And one time, you know, when you would negotiate a contract here in Nova Scotia, you'd be competing with the guy down the street. Maybe if you lived in Dartmouth, you'd be competing with someone in Halifax, or it really, really got tough. You might be competing with someone in Bridgewater or someplace like that. But now, today, with the technology today, you're competing with people all over the world, all over the world. And when you think about that, and you look at Mexico, we've seen the Moyer's Candy Factory over here close. Some pretty well-paid jobs. I mean, someone just in a regular labor force, I believe, was making about $14 an hour, which is really good money, and a steady full-time job. And they moved to Mexico. And Mexico probably pays less than $2 an hour, fewer taxes, fewer corporate taxes, fewer property taxes, fewer regulations to go with. So why do you think they moved up from Nova Scotia? That was before this NDP government got in and jacked up the taxes on our GST, adding 2% more to everything we buy. Also before the income tax effect is slowly creeping up, called bracket creep. I've talked about that here in this province. Makes companies less competitive and makes them more difficult to compete with someone outside the province. And now it's getting to the point that New Brunswick is more competitive than Nova Scotia. That's not good. They got lower tax rates, lower GST. They've got probably a lot better power rates, and the list goes on and on. So how long is a company going to stay here? How long? And, you know, we've talked about here, there's 12,500 jobs gone in Nova Scotia. That's reality. That's reality. There's more being lost every day. And all these jobs are very well-paid jobs. And especially if you're out in a rural area, and you lose 50 or 100 jobs in a rural area, where you don't have many people or don't have many jobs, it's a significant blow to your community. So if you've got some small company there that maybe employs 20 or 30 or 40 people, and they're going along quite well, they're not unionized, and all of a sudden they become unionized under Bill 100, and then they come to the first contract under this bill that will be forced through by the NDP, first contract arbitration. And what will happen then, what if the wages go up, 20%, 30%, 40%? Well, then they've got a problem. That company probably can't compete anymore in the market, in their market. Now, they may be a niche market if they're lucky, real lucky. But there's nothing that's made or produced or put together in this country that can't be reproduced somewhere else, and usually at a significant lower cost. Well, one time, we had the best equipment, we had the best education, and all the things that give us real competitive advantage. So a little bit higher tax, a little bit higher cost, really didn't matter because we made up for it in productivity through equipment and all the other things. But as we've become more and more encumbered by unions, and in some cases, not that our unions are bad all the time, they have their place, and they definitely have made a better workplace for Nova Scotians and all of anywhere the union has been. But if you get over encumbered with all this, first thing, you become uncompetitive. When you do become uncompetitive, first thing, you can't compete anymore. You can't compete anymore. What happens to your business? You go broke. You go broke, or you quit. You just close shop and say, that's it, I've had enough, I can't do this anymore. And then you get some choices to make. Well, do I move my business, my niche product I have, out of Nova Scotia? If I was still running the business, I can tell you I'd be very seriously looking at that right now. No, although I don't want to leave Nova Scotia, I love it here, I love the people, I love the province, but I would move. That's only me. And I'm sure every business out there is looking at it the same way. Now, this bill will have a negative effect in other ways, too. What about the small little guy that fixes the appliances? I know we've had a very reputable company in my home recently and doing some repairs to some equipment we have, that appliances, and 4 or 5 people work in the place. If it gets organized and unionized, and they go to a first contract arbitration, and all of a sudden the cost is increased significantly to repair appliances, what's going to happen? Are we going to have people all of a sudden decide, well, it's not worth repairing that appliance, so we'll buy a new one? And lo and behold, you go out and buy the new one, and guess where it's made? In China. Well, that don't sound too bad either, except there's no jobs producing that product in Canada, or even in the U.S. So if we buy products that are made in Canada or the U.S., it really helps our economy because they're so interconnected. But if you make it made in China, made in Taiwan, made in Korea, it's outside our areas. So we look at that. Then one of the advantages we had was the equipment that we used to use. You buy the best equipment on the market, and you put it to work in Nova Scotia, and you usually can be competitive. That's not the case anymore. Guess where these machines are coming from? They're coming from Taiwan and China and Korea, because they've set the manufacturing facilities up there to make this equipment, because they can build it better quality and less cost, because the labor cost is down and the taxes are down in the communities. So we're at a disadvantage immediately. So that means they sell to anyone in the world. So now anyone in the world can get this equipment and compete with Nova Scotia. So then you say, okay, we had the best education system. Well, I watched a documentary here a while ago when the children in, I believe in Korea, South Korea, were going to school. They go 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. Well, it don't take long to figure out that indeed they're probably getting a lot better education than we are here now. And they're actually bringing instructors and teachers over from Nova Scotia and other parts of Canada to teach these children English. So when they go to the international markets, they can speak English. I remember years ago, I was at an international machinery show in the U.S., and one of the biggest ones, well, it's the biggest one in the world. And there was a lot of companies at that time just starting to break into the U.S. market. And a lot of gentlemen there from Japan. And they were more interested in learning how to speak English than they were to sell the equipment. Now, that doesn't make sense on the surface. But if you look at what was happening, they wanted to learn to speak English very well so they could sell more equipment when they could really understand the technology in terms that the North Americans understood. And they were very, very, very clear to say that. And they were sent there by their companies with hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment sitting around them. They said, if you can sell some equipment, be very happy, but if you learn how to speak English, we'll be happier. And this is the way it's going. So the more obstacles, and this is an obstacle, you place in front of a business, and you tell a business you can't do this, or you can't do that, you don't want to do this, you don't want to do that, and all these things in place, then all of a sudden the business says, is it worth it? Is it worth it? You know, we talked the other day here, the credit unions, the Minister of Economic Development was always saying it was a fantastic thing they have with the credit unions, with 75% loan guarantee on the loans when you get a loan from the credit union. And it is a good program. I've personally referred businesses to it. But until just recently, I didn't realize what interest rate they were charging. Now, if you go to business, you usually can get 0.5%, 1%, 1.5% above prime for all your loans. That's your operating loans, and some of the long-term loans, you can even get a better deal on that. Well, the credit union is charging between 4 and 7% above the prime rate. That's right now is anywhere from 7 to 10% interest on these loans. That makes a company less competitive because they're spending so much money paying these loans back. And it's very difficult to get loans when you have a small business. Very, very difficult. And anyone that hasn't run a small business wouldn't understand this or even have any idea how difficult it is. But, you know, you have to immediately give a personal guarantee for everything that you owe them. Plus, you have to give them all the assets of the company, all the receivables of the company, everything that's any value they want to take as collateral. And I don't disagree with that. Because the problem is with a small business, when you get a small business and it's going, you know, something like 60 or 90% of them, it's a huge number, in the first 2 years go bankrupt. And the next 2 to 3 years, another 50 or 60% go bankrupt again. So when you start out with 10 companies at the beginning, you're probably only down to 1, maybe 2 companies in 5 years' time that have actually succeeded. If you throw in another variable, like this first contract negotiations and arbitration, you're going to have a serious problem in your hands. You're going to have a serious problem. You're going to see businesses fold faster or decide not to start here. You're going to see companies that maybe are going to start a huge branch office of large companies say, well, Nova Scotia is not the place to do business. Because first thing you know, we're going to be unionized. Then we're going to have to go to first contract arbitration to settle a wage dispute. And we have fixed costs that we have to deal with. And how are we going to contend with that as we move forward and we decide that maybe we want to expand here? I don't think it's going to happen. We already see that we've lost at least 12,500 jobs in this province. And there's a lot more to come. A lot more to come, unfortunately. I talked before in here about seeing people in my constituency that are struggling every day. People that are working are struggling every day to pay the bills. When I say the bills, I'm not talking about cruises or big vacations, anything like that. I'm talking about people that are having trouble paying their power bill, which has gone up drastically, paying an oil bill, if they have an oil heat, gone up drastically, paying for gasoline. When this government went in office, it was $1 a liter for gas. Now it's $1.23, and we're down a little bit. It was $1.20, almost $1.28 the other day. So when you go through all that, and you see what the costs are, also the price of diesel is up. That's the fuel that everything moves with. And as you see the cost of things increase, the cost of the consumer increases. The more increases of the consumer, the less competitive we are here. And you look at what you have to do to run a business. Unless you've run a business and understand what it is, it's impossible to explain to somebody. And people have this attitude, you know, business got all kinds of money, you know, they can afford this, they can afford that. Well, really, they can't. If they're real lucky a business, they'll make very good money. They will reinvest in their business. They will reinvest in their employees. They will reinvest in the community. They will help the organizations. Just a few minutes ago here, we're talking about the small hockey, you know, the kids and playing hockey and the baseball teams of kids and all the organizations that are out fundraising today, to try to get money to do the things that are so important to our communities and to the people in our communities. If businesses don't make money, they can't contribute to that. And if the businesses don't contribute, there's not going to be enough money to run these organizations, and some of them will fold. So what's going to happen then? Will it mean that, well, this organization that maybe we're getting wheelchairs for somebody in the community that really needed wheelchairs and couldn't afford them, now can't get the wheelchair. So that means that somebody that could have maybe gone to work can't go to work anymore. Or they won't get a job because they're not mobile. Or they just can't get around. They can't even get out and go to the grocery store and buy groceries. So this has a long-reaching, potentially devastating effect on our whole province. And as we go through the process and see how all this works, and it will work as time goes on, then you're going to be a lot of people here They're going to be very disappointed in this government. And unfortunately, they're going to have to find out that the hard way. And it's very unforgiving as you go through the process of seeing how a business grows, prospers, and indeed puts things back in the local community. And usually small businesses, they put things back in the local community. Someone within very short distance from their office, and they go and they don't go very far away because they want to support the people that support them. So when you see this transpire, and you talk about a bill like this, it's Bill 102, and any businesses out there that have the time to watch tonight are probably not aware of this bill, and not aware of what this is potentially doing to their business. So they should start paying attention. They should be in here to law amendments and really, really telling this government what it means. I know the NDP has huge financial support from the unions in this country. I know during my last election campaign, one of my campaign workers was pretty astute, and he said, those two guys don't look like they're from here. I'm going to go ask them. So we did. The NDP candidate, very wonderful lady, was running against me, very credible candidate. She goes over and asks these two people, where are you from? Well, one was both from Ontario, had their clipboards. They were down here. How long are you here for? The term of the election. I'm sure that never showed up on the expenses for the election. So who paid for their travel to here, their lodging here, and all the costs and all their meals and everything was here? Well, they were here. That's a good question. Maybe something that should be investigated. But with that kind of debt owed to an organization or organizations by this government, it's pretty scary. You know, they talk about business supporting our party and the Conservative Party. What's the difference? It really makes you wonder. So when you look at these things and you see why is this government pushing so hard for this bill, you know, and the act is really deceiving, right? It's an act to prevent unnecessary labor disputes and protect the economy. Protect the economy from what? You know, and from what? The economy works well if we're competitive, building quality products, and build them at a reasonable time, in a reasonable time. In order to do that, you have to have very skilled people, very diligent people, and you don't want to be bogged down, often cases, trying to negotiate contracts partway through what's happening. I remember a lot of times when the unions just don't believe that a company is going to close if they don't settle a dispute. And when they do find out that indeed the employees there, usually those aren't the people negotiating. Someone comes from away, usually from what I've seen, negotiate these big contracts. Oh, don't worry, you know, you'll have your job, you'll have your job. At the end of the day, when the company closes, these guys take off to Toronto, wherever they're from. They still get their job, but the guy, the small guy, the guy's just trying to make a living, doesn't have his job anymore. So you tell me that really works? It doesn't work. So you've really got to look at the possible impact, and not possible, probable impact of this bill. You know, long after we're gone, someone's going to have to probably amend this bill. We're going to have to definitely amend Bill 100 to make it more realistic for Nova Scotia and the economy in Nova Scotia to get this thing in place. They're going to remember the legacy of this NDP government long time, for a long, long time. And probably the damage they're doing to the economy right now, with the 12,500 jobs gone so far, and we're still counting, that's only after a couple of years. Imagine what it's going to be like in 3 or 4 years' time, or 2 years' time. They'll probably call an election before then to ensure that the people in the province don't really realize what's happening to them. You know, when you go through that and see it, when people come in and they talk about the financial problem they have and they can't understand why, well, I tell them, I said, you know, for every $10,000 you clear, you've lost $200 of GST, $200. That's $200 after tax money. Oh, and by the way, that $10,000 isn't worth $10,000 anymore because last year your income tax was put up. It was increased last year. Bracket creep is called, every year. So that's gone. So your $10,000 not worth $10,000, plus you're going to take $200 off of that. You take the over 30 or 40%, soon over 40%, so your power rate's gone up in that time. 25% increase in your gasoline, huge increases in grocery costs, and the list goes on and on. So that $10,000 you had 2 years ago, just 2 years ago, when these guys took power, 2 years ago, doesn't buy $10,000 worth of goods anymore. It doesn't. It might buy $7,000, maybe $7,500 worth of stuff. So where'd the other money go? What are you going to do to make up that money? What are you going to do? So very soon, your savings will be gone. I see people every day. You can't pay your property taxes possibly. You can't pay your power bill. You can't pay your heat bill. Maybe you can't quite buy all the groceries you need. So if you got a family of 4 with 2 people working and 2 children, you're not going to go to a food bank. Although some people have to go to a food bank with 2 of them working. It makes you wonder why this is happening. And you see very quickly what's happened to an economy. I also spoke before about the fact that this province now is 43% of the total workforce works in government. And when government generates things, it generates nothing back in the economy. It takes tax dollars away from people, spend the money, provide services. Now those services are very, very important to Nova Scotians. Very important. But when you look at what really brings money into the province, it's the small businesses that export outside of Nova Scotia. Even if it's just across the border in New Brunswick, even if it's just to Prince Edward Island, that's export, export. And each export dollar several years ago was worth not $10, but $7 in economic spin-off. For every dollar they sold, it meant a $7 really net gain for the community that export was sent from, or the province, whichever the case may be, either way. So when you go through and you look at that and see what kind of impact that is, so we've lost 12,500 jobs from industry. We haven't lost any from government. Actually, the government has grown under this government. And so you add nothing into the economy with 43% of the people in this province adding nothing to the economy. Now, that's just the people that are working. Then you get a large group of people that, for whatever reason, cannot work. Disabled, all kinds of issues. And that's part of our society, and that's fine. So you have another percentage of the economy that are not contributing anything. And then we have a lot of people that are retired. Now, if the pensions are coming from outside of Nova Scotia, if it's a federal government pension, that's fine. The money's coming from Ottawa, and it does help our economy. But if it's a provincial pension here for provincial civil servants or teachers or anybody like that that's in this province, that's not adding anything to the province. Nothing. Because that is money that is just being recirculated through the system. Those pensions are important to people. But more and more people are realizing that it's cheaper to live outside of Nova Scotia, but still live in Canada. It's cheaper because your income tax is much higher here than it is pretty well anywhere else in the country. Well, it is higher than anywhere else in the country. So why would you live here after you retire? Why would you live here? Family here? No, probably not, because your kids have probably gone to Alberta to work because the economy's better there, there's lots of jobs. And indeed, they don't have the problems here with the taxation that we do and all the other issues. You might pay more for a home out there, but indeed, you clear more money every year, so it's easier to pay for the home. So as you look at all these things, all the negative things that are happening in this province, this could be the final nail that goes in the coffin and totally kills the economy in this province. Now, there's a lot of naysayers out there, oh, no, that won't happen, that won't happen. You know, I remember the cod fishing industry in this province and in Atlantic Canada, that'll never go away. Guess what? There's no cod fishery in eastern Canada now. Even a sport fishery for cod is strictly restricted, as it should be, indeed, if it ever comes back. So don't say never happen. It could possibly happen. It probably will happen unless the taxes are eased off in this province and make it more competitive for people to do business here. We need better training in this province. We have a reasonably good training, but not up to the standard it should be for manufacturing. So as we go forward and we see all the things that are happening in this province,
Order. I recognize the Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call a point of order on the Speaker suggested that there's no cod fisheries on the Atlantic East Coast. I bring that to your attention. There is a cod fishery on the East Coast of Canada.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your interesting observation, but it's not a point of order. I recognize the member for Preston.
well, I would like to thank the Minister for that intervention. He himself being a fisherman, he would know that indeed the cod fishery isn't the fishery it was. And indeed there was a major crisis in this province, in this country, over the cod fishery in the East Coast. And there still is a crisis. Although there's a few fish back now, it's quite interesting to see the minister's point of view. That same minister probably thinks that this is going to really, really help the economy in the province. And indeed, at Nova Scotia, all going to be working because of this fantastic bill they're putting forward. Well, if you believe there's all kinds of codfish in Nova Scotia still, or off Nova Scotia's coast, you probably believe that. But the people in the industry that had to get rid of their licenses, lost their boats, and everything else in the industry may disagree with this fisheries minister. And I can remember him being at meetings that I held when I was fisheries minister, that indeed they were pretty concerned about the fishery. So it's quite interesting to see that kind of comment. I'd encourage the other members over there that don't believe that what I'm talking about is real or possibly can do anything, to make a point of order as well. It's going to be quite interesting to see what kind of stuff they come up with. But it'll be interesting, you know, they could get up and speak on this bill and say how wonderful it is for the union buddies and work away at that and how it's going to really help the economy in a little small town now that's almost dying in Nova Scotia as people have to move to Halifax Regional Municipality to work. And, you know, it's just so unbelievable that this government has brought this bill forward to further reduce efficiencies and competitiveness of businesses in Nova Scotia. That's what it comes down to, bottom line. So I guess maybe they want everyone to work in government, everyone to belong to the unions, everybody to be unionized, and we'll really be in good shape. Well, every place that's all been unionized, it's just a matter of time, and it's not in good shape. It's not competitive. And indeed, things aren't as rosy as they paint it to be. So it's going to be interesting to see, as time wears through in all this, and the legacy of this government, this one-term government, goes through, just exactly how much damage they've done to the Nova Scotia economy. It's going to be very serious. And as we watch it unfold, fortunately, I'm to the age now that I don't think so I'll ever run a business again, but who knows? Who knows? When I finally decide to give up being a politician. And that's going to be some time away, and it's going to be interesting. And I've got more time in here than 99% of the guys on that side of the house are ever going to have, especially when Nova Scotia figures out what's going on here. I think maybe they woke up over there all of a sudden, you know. They've been asleep at the switch, and when the people take the revenge on them at next election time, they may not be so happy a crowd over there. You know, it's pretty interesting. When I talk to business people today, and you know, business people are they're pretty intense. They work hard, they take big risks, and they see things happen. And I won't say exactly what they say because that would be out of order in this place about this NDP government. But it's not very pleasant, let's put it that way. And they say, you know, can we get rid of them now? I said, no, you've got to wait till the next election and get rid of them then. They said, well, don't worry, we're going to. And then when you talk to their employees are saying the same thing. So it's pretty interesting, no? It's pretty darn interesting. And especially the employees that don't have jobs anymore. You know, they get a little bit less competitive. So they've got to lay off 1 or 2 people or 3 people or 4 people. Where do those people find a job? They don't. They don't. And you know, we got this big shipbuilding contract here that's going to save everything. The Premier was telling us how he got this contract. Going to save the whole world, right? Come to find out, I made a mistake here. I made a mistake and said there's going to be 19. I said there's going to be an increase of 1,900 jobs. That was a guesstimate on my part based on the workplace that they had talked about. And well, I'll talk about that in a second. But you know, the Irvings come on the radio and said, you know, we're only going to have 1,200. That's 1,200 new jobs in our facility. Not 11,000. Not 11,000. 1,200. That's the real number from the people that got this contract, not this government that's going through this crap. And when you go, oh, that's awful, isn't it? You know, we got this 5-year plan. We got this 5-year highway plan.
Order. Order. I would just remind the honourable member that the language just used is unparliamentary. And if he could omit it from the debate tonight.
Can he apologize to us? I also heard it over there.
I recognize the member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I will withdraw that comment. I withdraw the comment. Let's put it that way. Anyway, as we go through this whole thing, I was talking to a gentleman the other day, and he said, you know, all this huge influx of people are coming for this contract that Irving has, which is a great contract, and Irving did a great job in getting it. Irving, I stress, not this government. He said, where's the highway plan to move all these people? All these people. Where's the plan? There is no plan because the government knows it's not going to need new highways. So if there's something there's going to be 11,000 new jobs traveling to downtown Halifax, this province should be hopping on the bandwagon and saying, okay, we got to build some really innovative ways to move people around. Not a word about that, not a word. So, you know, when you go through the whole thing and you really look at what kind of an economic impact that's going to be, it's going to be quite interesting. And my colleagues opposite there, you know, they should get up and talk about this and just see what kind of stuff they're going to feed us and what kind they're going to tell us about this thing. And it's interesting to see what's going to happen as it plays out. Federal government's doing major layoffs right now in their departments. Well, they got to balance the books, they say. I don't see this government balancing the books that way. They keep hiring more and more people and more costs to the taxpayers. Every time that everything goes up, the cost goes up. And who pays it? The people that work in business. The people that work in business. And as that continues, you see the business become less and less competitive because they got to pay more and more taxes to feed this government's interesting approach to trying to grow the economy. Again, you know, 12,500 jobs gone. Gas has gone up almost 25 cents. 25 cents, a buck and a quarter for gas. And the U.S. is about 84 cents. So we can be competitive? No way. Electricity rates, some of the highest in the country. Yet this government allows Nova Scotia Power to put out $1.06 billion. $1.6 0.6 billion to Emera, right outside this province. Gone. Gone. And I understand, and I want to hear more information on this, but I understand Emera may be having some serious financial problems because of some dealings they've had outside the country. I don't know that, but that's a rumor that's around. Hopefully that's not true. If it is, Nova Scotians going to have to pay more than the 1.06 billion they've already paid to Emera? Is that going to happen? How much more is the power rates going to go up? How many more people are going to not be able to pay their power bills? Already I'm seeing people in my office that can't pay their power bills and they don't know what they're going to do this winter. So what's going to happen? People desperately looking for work that can't find work. You know, the growth in Nova Scotia's economy is dismal, to say the least. Dismal. Why is it dismal? Because of the policies of this government. I heard honourable colleagues say that this shipbuilding contract over there, that people in Spry Bay are going to be working. I remember that. Well, my family's from Spry Bay. Well, I'll tell you, I'd be darn lucky if anyone in Spry Bay gets a job from the shipbuilding contract, quite frankly. And the honourable member for that area should go down and visit the people and see what they say about that. And when you go look and see what's happening, and you add this first contract arbitration to a company, is it worthwhile setting up in Nova Scotia? No, probably not. When you look at the taxes that this province pays, income tax, and the Premier says all the time about the corporate tax. Well, corporate tax is low, but if you don't make any money, corporate tax reduction doesn't mean a darn thing. And the way the costs are here, you can be darn lucky if you make any money in this province when you start working and you go through the thing. So tax cuts of small business don't mean a darn thing. And again, it's the same as anything. If you make a lot of money, you pay a lot of tax. If you don't make any money, you don't pay any tax. So in reality, it hasn't done anything. So we looked at job creation this government has done to help smooth the economy. So they've got a cut in small business tax. Well, if you're a smart business owner in this province, you will make sure that you probably don't pay very much corporate tax because you invest in new equipment and you do other things to ensure that you don't do that. So down the road, you can make more money, make the company more valuable, and indeed use the tax system to your advantage. So you really don't save very much money in your corporate tax. Meantime, your personal income tax is going up every year through bracket creep, but they haven't addressed that. I talked already about the small business loans through the credit unions. Again, 7 to 10% when the prime rate now is 3 or below. And when you look at that, it's a very, very poor environment for business to run. They know, and those guys over here on the other side, I don't think any of them really run a business in manufacturing or anything like that. They haven't done that. They don't know what it's like to do that. And if you go and see that, and if I hear from over there, someone said they might have done that, they don't like to hear what they have to say. I hear like what they have to say, how this is going to affect the business in this province. You know, it makes you wonder. It really makes you wonder what's going to happen as this whole thing comes forward. Well, I would tell anyone out there that's listening, listen very carefully to what's happening here by this government. Remember, when your children have to leave now to get a job, and that's what's happening with the jobs that have been lost, a lot more to come. It was indeed the regressive taxes that this government put in place and the poor plan for economic growth in this province. Again, when you come near dead last in economic growth, there's something wrong. There's something seriously wrong. This is a wonderful province. We've got a lot of natural resources. We've got very good people working here, very hard-working people. And that's why when you go out west, the first thing to say from Nova Scotia or from Newfoundland, indeed, or New Brunswick, or Prince Edward Island, they'll probably give you a job immediately because they know there's a work ethic here. A very good work ethic, and an ethic that wants to make very good products at a that are quality and make them on time, which is very difficult to do. And as we see more and more automation in places like China, well, you know, say China's got second-grade equipment and all this sort of stuff. That's not true. It's not true. I remember when I was buying some drill bits for my business, and some large ones, and a local company at that time had just started buying some from China, and they said, well, look, you can buy the Chinese one for $16. It's $120 for the one that's made in the U.S. And they said, what we found out is the one from China actually works better than the one for 100 and something, 20-some dollars. They said, why don't you try it? If you don't like it, bring it back, and we'll sell you the one for 120 bucks. I said, okay, I'll take it and try it. And I did have a lot of the other ones made in the U.S. So after I used the ones in China, that's the only ones I bought. Because those are the ones that work better, they cut better, and they work better at a fraction of the cost. So I could afford to go buy a whole set of these drills, and these are large drills, very expensive. So I'd have them in my shop, and they work better than the US-made ones. And that's an awful thing to have to say. I prefer to buy the US or Canadian-made products and to help our local economy and get our economy going. But in reality, I was in a competitive environment, and I had to do everything I possibly could to compete with my closest competitors. At that time, they were in Europe and in the US. So indeed, I had to make sure I cut every cost I could without cutting quality or productivity in my shop. So as you see how this unfolds, it's really difficult, can be very, very difficult for young people in this province to stay here and live here. Now, we can't be all working in the healthcare system. We can't be all school teachers. And we can't do all the things that the most attractive jobs are for young people here today. We need plumbers, electricians, machinists, sheet metal workers. We need them here producing products that are either imported here where we're displacing or we're shipping outside the province. And it's hard for people to understand how much of an economic impact that is. You know, you get somebody here that's repairing something that came from away, it's very important, rather than buying a new part that's shipped in from China or Japan or some other place. And you'll notice now when you go to buy things in your local stores, you know, made in Germany, they're made in China, they're made in Japan, made in Korea, Taiwan, all over the world. Those same products used to be made in North America, but they're not anymore. You know, one thing that I'll give the Americans credit for is you look at buying a new car in the US, it shows you how much content is actually made in the US. It tells you exact content of that car, what percentage of that car is made in the US. And that's very positive. If people realize that indeed that's what they should be buying is because they're supporting jobs in Canada and the US. And when they get there and they see this sort of thing that's happening with this Bill 102, it makes you wonder how the local companies can compete. But they just can't. They can't when they go through the process. And when you look and see how this over a long period of time will negatively affect our economy, it's pretty easy to see what's going to happen here. This government forced Bill 100 through against objections of businesses. This is the next step, 102, and I'm not sure what the next one is that got planned, but I'm sure there's another bill that they're going to bring forward that again is going to hurt our economy. And as we move forward and we see this, you know, the members of the government joke about this and say, what bill are you talking about? Well, you can go explain to your constituents when they don't have jobs. You can just tell them. You can tell them, you know, we supported this bill. It's our bill. It's the NDP bill that did this, you know. That's why we don't have a job here. Oh, yeah, it'll happen. It will happen. And as that all transpires and goes through, and you see your neighbors moving away that probably had your sign on the lawn last time, that realize what's happened to them and happened to their families, they will be saying, you know, we really don't want your sign this time because we're not going to support you again. We're not going to support you again. You know, and all this joking and everything aside, and all the stuff that the government is saying, I say I've been here a long time. I've seen a lot of elections. I've worked on a lot of elections before that. A lot of elections. And I'll probably be here as long as I want to be here.
That's right. Good member.
But, you know, when there's a group of people in your government that decide that they're going to make these laws and rules that affect the economy of our province, the people are going to suffer. The people in the backbenches that didn't speak up loud enough in caucus to stop some of this stuff. So that's going to be interesting when that transpires. So it does hurt. It really does hurt them, you know. But that's all right. They'll joke and go on and all that stuff. And next election, when they're not in government anymore, most all of them are gone. They'll be going to the unions, getting a job in the union, with the union hall. Maybe negotiating contracts for some of the small business that'll promptly close after the deal's made. And wonder why that they're not doing well in their community and what's going on. You know, and the other thing with this is, you know, according to the senior secretary, we get 1,000 people a week turning 65. 1,000 a week. That's a lot of people every year. That's 52,000 people a year that are going to come out of the workforce. And it's going to be interesting when that expertise disappears in industry and see what happens as things go on. You know, everybody wants new roads. Everybody wants a road fixed. Everyone wants a guardrail. They want drainage problems fixed as we go through this stuff. But if we don't have businesses making money and paying taxes, you're not going to have the money. You get no money now to fix this stuff. You're going to have even less money. So what's going to happen then? Who are you going to tax? Who's going to be left to tax? And you're going to have a hard job finding anyone that has that can answer that question, because the people aren't going to be there to tax, you know. And if you don't have the tax revenue coming in, you can't do these things. How are you going to service the debt? How are you going to do that? It just makes you wonder how you can possibly, conceivably, do some of these things that this government is doing. I mean, they went on a platform of not raising taxes. Bang, right away, up goes the GST. Up goes all the user fees, 1,400 of them. And I believe, in one trailer, registering trailers or something went up twice in 1 month. I remember when the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, again, a very straightforward and honest man, when I questioned him in the Red Room in budget debate, I said, how do you justify the cost on these things? Because there were 1,400 of them. They went up like 2 or 3%, whatever the cost was. And the finance minister said, no, it's because the cost has gone up. I said, it can't be. It can't be. It's got to be that each one of them has a different cost, because it costs more to administer some of these fees than it does other ones. What are the costs? Well, he couldn't tell me. His staff couldn't tell me. And finally, when I questioned him more and more and more, he finally admitted it was a directive from the Minister of Finance, a directive from the Department of Finance to put these fees up. It's a tax increase. A tax increase. That's all it was, a tax increase. So when you go through this over and over and over again, all the little fees that have increased, all the little small things, and as time goes on, it nickels and dimes the regular taxpayer, the person that's working at the local garage, the guy that's working for the plumbing outfit, the guy that's doing the carpentry work, all these people, it's taken their disposable income away. And as their disposable income goes away, what happens? What happens? They don't have the money to buy the goods that they would normally buy. So they may not go buy something from their local garage that they would have normally bought and help the jobs in there. They don't do that anymore. They don't do the other things that they do, maybe some entertainment things that they go to local theater or something. They don't go to theater anymore. They're now struggling to buy groceries and pay the oil bill, pay the gas bill, pay the electric bill, pay your property taxes. They don't do renovations. Better deal for today's families. It's absolutely right, you know. Better deal. We'll tax you to death. We'll tax you to death. Better deal for today's families, you know. Put those taxes up, really help you. Make your family better. We'll make sure there's no jobs in Nova Scotia so your kids can go to Alberta and work where there's less taxes. That helps. That helps a better deal for today's families. That's a better deal. Today's families got a worse and worse ring to it all the time. And as people realize this fantastic deal that they got for this NDP government, the NDP government's going to be gone, and gone soon, I hope, really soon. And you know, they shake their heads and all that stuff. And I've seen that before. I've seen it over and over again. And the guys in the back aren't allowed to say anything, and the ladies in the back aren't allowed to say anything anyway, when they're not allowed to get up on the floor and talk about anything. The finance minister and the ministers in the front row have got them all quieted down, so they can't do anything. So it'll be interesting to see, as time goes on, how they're going to say anything. What are they telling their constituents? You know, you're not allowed to speak in the House. You know, your taxes have gone up. Well, that's okay, though. You know, it's okay, you know, my constituency, because, you know, it's not really affecting you, but it is affecting them. So there's going to be some interesting explaining to do as this thing goes on. How much time do I have left? 5 minutes? So I don't have more time than that left? I'm very disappointed. I would really like to talk about this for several hours and keep, you know, keep this going. I'm sure with the unanimous consent of the House, it would allow me to speak longer. And I don't think the NDP likes my conversation. I really don't. They're worried, you know, they're worried over there about their seats and how they're going to survive for the next election. But anyway, time will tell, and time will tell how difficult it's going to be for Nova Scotians to live when these guys are finished with them. You know, the better deal for today's families, and higher taxes, lower services, and all the great things that the NDP is doing for them. All the great things. Great for the unions. Great for the guys that give them money to run the election campaigns. That's a good deal for them. But, you know, when their union bosses disappear into Ontario or wherever they come from, who knows, they're gone. And Nova Scotians are left to clean up the mess. The mess is going to be left by this government, and in the process of being left, it's going to be pretty serious for Nova Scotians. So you think now we're seeing so many young people go away and outside the province, the people we need to make our economy grow. It's going to get worse. You take all these jobs away, and say so far we've counted 12,500 gone in Nova Scotia. It's not going to get better. I looked at all the things that economic development is doing to try to grow jobs in this province. Well, it's a pretty miserable small list of things that it's done, and really nothing on that list I could see. Nothing I could see as a former business owner that would help grow the economy in the province. Absolutely nothing. Zero. So how are you going to grow the economy? Put taxes up. That helps. Helps business become less competitive. Better deal for today's families. You know, I talk to constituents in my riding, and they come in and they say, well, you know, I can't pay my oil bill. I said, why can't you pay your oil bill? Well, I don't have as much money as I had last year, but I'm still making the same money I did. And I talked about this before. You know, the reason they don't have as much money is because they're being taxed to death. And as you get more and more cost, and business become less and less competitive, they're not going to have the money to invest in the province like we've seen in the past. The hockey teams are going to have a difficult time getting money enough to operate. Of course, I guess there probably be fewer hockey teams, because a lot of people are going to have to leave the province to find a job anyway at the rate things are going. Pretty soon everything's going to be shut down. And shut down. And probably shut down for good, a lot of the businesses. And if anyone thinks business owners today are going to say to unions, we've already seen the pulp and paper mill go to the employees and say we need massive concessions. And the union, luckily, hopefully, made the right choice and gave them that concessions, because they know, they're convinced, and they're rightfully so, that if they don't get the concession, that company doesn't get the concessions it needs, it's not going to be in Nova Scotia anymore. And that's going to be a lot of really highly paid, really good jobs that are going to be gone from this province. And they're gone. They don't come back. They're gone. They'll make paper somewhere else. Somewhere else it's less expensive to do so. It's so cheap to ship things around the world now. That's not even, it's so cheap to ship stuff. And with the computerization now, you can deal with your customer anywhere in the world that you can imagine, and you can do it instantaneously, absolutely instantaneously. It's not like years and years ago you had to put letters out, wait for letters to come back, and all the things that today are just instantaneous. You know, Mr. Speaker, with those few words of encouragement for the government, with their better deal for today's families, which is awful, the deal they've bestowed upon the people, I will take my seat and listen to the learned colleagues from the third party and see if they share our opinion on this bill that I think is going to kill the economy in Nova Scotia, given enough time. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it gives me some pleasure to still stand here today and speak on Bill number 102, an act to prevent unnecessary labor disruptions and protect the economy. Now, where did you get a name like that, Mr. Speaker? I know that they ran on this whole thing about a better deal for the families of Nova Scotia, but do they listen to anybody here in the province of Nova Scotia? And an act to protect the economy. Well, if they were doing all the things they said they were doing, if the job they were doing on our economy was as good as they say they were doing, you wouldn't have to protect it because it would be strong anyway. But apparently, they think that they can make legislation, and that legislation will make the world a better place. This legislation, according to the people of Nova Scotia, the ones that talk to us, won't do that. As a matter of fact, you don't have to take my word for that, Mr. Speaker, and today, and I will table this, but the Nova Scotia Chambers of Commerce have said today they are very disappointed with the introduction of the first contract arbitration legislation by the Dexter government. I am very disappointed that despite businesses large and small and several business organizations voicing their objections and concerns, the Premier has not heard us. Here we are today with more, Mr. Speaker, anti-business legislation. And that's what Chris Atwood, the president of the Nova Scotia Chambers of Commerce, said. Bill 100 was brought in under the exact same circumstances, and look where we're at today. Now, Mr. Speaker, it goes on to say in this press release, it is widely recognized that since 2003, Nova Scotia's time lost due to work stoppages has been consistently below the national average. Below the national average, Mr. Speaker. And that's 97% of the bargaining does reach agreement during conciliation, rather. The most compelling fact is that for the last 14 years, Mr. Speaker, 14 years, the Labour Board has only been ordered parties to bargain in good faith 3 times. Now, Mr. Speaker, here we are. We have a piece of legislation that says we need to do this now. But in 14 years, only 3 times was it required for that type of conciliation. And then, of course, we have our comments from our Deputy Premier. And he's quoted Saturday, November the 19th, as saying, and this is from Government House Leader Frank Corbett. Oh,
Order.
Mr. Speaker.
Order.
I was quoting from the paper, but I know better, and I apologize and retract my statement from the Deputy Premier and the House Leader.
Order. Order. I thank the honourable member, and I recognize the member for Cape Breton West.
And again, Mr. Speaker, my mic may have been off, so I do want to apologize for naming that member. I do know better, and I was reading I was reading the direct quote out of the paper, and so I do want to make sure that the apology is there. The government host leader, also the deputy premier, said, it's a little bit like the sky is falling, but it is what it is. He said, if they want to filibuster, that's their right. But we all know at the end of the day that it's a majority government. We know at some point in time the bill will pass. Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, that is kind of disturbing. And I'll tell you why it's disturbing. Because we have a process in the province of Nova Scotia, one that we should all be quite proud of. Because we've been a host here, the oldest host in the country. We have some of the best legislation in the world. And yet, now we hear, the process has always been, there's a first reading, there's a second reading, law amendments, and there's a third reading. And we always believed in this House that when you went to law amendments, it was to give the public an opportunity to speak on the bill and to give their input. Because I think sometimes, some of us in this House, and maybe the ones in the benches on the other side, forget the reason we're here.
That's right. That's right.
The reason we are here, and I heard them making comments before about, you know, it wouldn't be up to you if you would get re-elected, or it wouldn't be up to you. But the reason that we're here is indeed because we were elected by people. We were elected by the people of the province of Nova Scotia. And I will say this, Mr. Speaker, there's 52 of us here. And you know what? I truly believe that the 52 members of this House are here because they want to do what's right for Nova Scotia. And I have no problem believing that. None. What I do have a problem with, Mr. Speaker, is that they don't respect the very reason why we're here. We're here to do the bidding of the people that elected us. We're not here as individual MLAs to tell the people that elected us what's good for them. We're here to listen to them, to hear what they had to say, and then to translate that into legislation that will make this province a better place for all of us to live. And Mr. Speaker, when you say we have a majority government and it's going to happen anyway, that isn't giving the system the respect that it's supposed to have. Mr. Speaker, the whole process. Now listen, Mr. Speaker, there's people over there that are yabbering on, and if they want to get up and speak, oh, right, they're not allowed to, I forgot, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. But if they want to get up to speak, I'm sure that if they talk to the Deputy Premier, he'll allow that. But right now, it's my time to speak. And I would appreciate the opportunity to pass on the information and the message that was given to me by the constituents I represent on the weekend. Now, Mr. Speaker, the whole thing here is about respecting the institution and respecting the people that we represent. We've heard today from 7,000 representatives of 7,000 businesses. They're saying this is not good for us. This is not good for the economy of the province of Nova Scotia. The Chamber of Commerces of Nova Scotia have said that. Now, Mr. Speaker, can they all be wrong? These are the people that are driving our economy. These are the people who, up to this point, have made sure that the economy of Nova Scotia survives. They provide employment to a majority of the Nova Scotians. And we're saying that we shouldn't listen to them? They're saying that they know better? Well, Mr. Speaker, the representation that they're supposed to be getting is supposed to listen to them, take that information, take it and listen to it, and then develop legislation that's good for the province of Nova Scotia. It doesn't appear to be that way. It appears that we're going to have this legislation because they have a majority government. Maybe they have to listen to some special groups. Maybe there's something else going on here that the small business community of this province doesn't understand or know about. I'm not sure, Mr. Speaker. But there are the 5 W's.
Who, what, when, where, and why? There are a lot of questions, Mr. Speaker, surrounding this government's intentions for first contract arbitration and who it will benefit. Who? Who has put this government up to this? Who wants it? Who has been asking for it? Who is expected to help? And who benefits from it? We know it's not the business community and the people they employ. So who is it? What? What problems is it trying to solve? What are the real benefits to the people who are out there, who are out of work, or whose wages have stayed the same or gone down while the cost of living continues to grow? And what is it going to fix, Mr. Speaker? There is an imaginary problem that this government has created, and there is no real reason as to why this legislation is needed. Mr. Speaker, it's all smoke and mirrors with this government. In order to push through their hidden agenda to help their special interest friends. It's not for the majority of Nova Scotians who they were elected to serve. We were all elected to serve. And another big question is why? Why now? And why first contract arbitration? Mr. Speaker, at a time when jobs are disappearing, when power rates are continuing to climb, when the government made it harder for families to scrape by from their decision to needlessly raise the HST to get their one-day wonder surplus, why now? Why create further uncertainty for our business community? Last month, I had a constituent who came to the office with an electricity disconnection notice, wondering how he was going to pay his power bill and put food on the table. He said, I'm barely able to make ends meet with my family, and every year it's getting increasingly bad. I work harder and harder, but at the end of the day, there's nothing left in the bank, and I don't know what I'm going to do. This person has worked hard all his entire life. He's got more pride than anyone I know. He's got deep calluses on his hands, but he's struggling to even provide the necessities of life. First contract arbitration, Mr. Speaker, was the farthest thing from his mind. And this government's made-up problem of productivity and work stoppages is just that. It's a made-up problem. He is worried about his children's education. He's worried about his wife's health care and his parents who have been waiting for long-term care beds. He's worried about their next meal and stocking up on wood this winter because they won't be able to afford to turn on their electric heat. So it begs the question, Mr. Speaker, who is pressuring the government to act on this? Where is the desire for first contract arbitration legislation coming from? It certainly hasn't been a public demand. There haven't been loud calls for it that I've heard. And Mr. Speaker, on the weekend, I was at several different events. And the only thing that came up about first contract arbitration was, make sure you vote against it. We don't need it. It's hurting my business. We had other people who said, I don't know what it is, but from what I'm reading, it's not going to be helpful for me. So, Mr. Speaker, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to go to our constituencies, we're supposed to listen to the people that we represent, and then we're supposed to come back here and share that information and do what's best for all Nova Scotians, not just for special interest groups. It's clear, in my opinion, Mr. Speaker, that this government puts special interests ahead of the public interest. And I guess, unfortunately, we shouldn't be surprised by this, because we've seen it before. We all remember Bill 100. Bill 100 was another extreme piece of anti-business legislation that put special interest ahead of our public interest. Remember the small business operators that lined up and pleaded with this government not to move ahead with their extreme labor agenda. Well, this government bullied ahead anyway, and now we see the same thing is happening here. Between this experience, the Bill 100 experience, and countless other instances, I think now it's crystal clear that this government is simply put anti-business. They're committed to destroying the private sector here in Nova Scotia, and make no mistake about it, Mr. Speaker, that's what this bill can do. It can destroy the private sector in Nova Scotia. And you don't have to take my word for it. There are examples of this very thing happening in other jurisdictions that have been imposed by first contract arbitration. And I'll take a few moments, Mr. Speaker, to speak about one of those issues. I'd like to take and talk about the devastating effect that first contract arbitration had on Treats, a franchise coffee and snack shop in Saskatoon. Well, I hear the member from Halifax Citadel, Sable Island over and say, do we have to hear that again? And Mr. Speaker, he does have to hear it again, because the first time he couldn't hear it and he didn't listen. The second time it didn't comprehend, and I'm sure when I'm finished he still won't know what the real world is about. But I am waiting for the day that he has the courage to stand up there and tell the people that he represents why this is such a good bill for him. I can't wait for that moment, Mr. Speaker, but then again, we know he won't be allowed to stand up. He won't be allowed to say anything, because his government knows what's best. They have a majority, and it will be what it is be. They're in the cone of silence over there. Maxwell's Market is right down at the back. I'd like to take... But anyway, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to continue on as much as it disturbs the member from Halifax Citadel.
Order. Order. The member for Cape Breton West has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm happy that the member for Halifax Citadel likes recycling, because he will never be recycled again. Treats operated at a university campus and mostly employed students on a part-time basis, Mr. Speaker. And we all know that the challenge many students face in finding part-time work during their studies. And that member, of all the members on that side of the House, should understand that, considering what he used to do for a living. Any businesses that could make a point of employing them, engaging them in their economic fabric, should be commended. And I think all members of this House would agree to that. In the case of Treats, the Canadian Union of Public Employees was certified as their bargaining agent. The bargaining of their agreement went on until only wage and monetary issues were unresolved. At that point, the employer made it known that he simply couldn't pay higher wages. The losses would be too great, and he wouldn't be able to make ends meet. The business would close, and the students would be out of work. But that wasn't good enough for that union. They pushed back, and they demanded the employees at Treats be paid the same wage as the university's unionized cafeteria employees. Let's not forget that Treats was a small business that happened to be facing the same challenges that we know all businesses are facing here in Nova Scotia. Many small businesses simply can't afford to pay union wages. In many cases, it means their business closed. Their employees are left out of work, and their families are left struggling. While the Treats and the bargaining agent remained at odds, the Labour Board intervened and imposed a first contract agreement that increased the workers' wages by almost 31%, almost a third more, Mr. Speaker. During that 14-month ordeal, the employees at Treats simply acknowledged that they could the employers at Treats, simply acknowledged that they could no longer make ends meet with a first contract imposed on them, and they ended up having to sell their business. And mostly employed students on a part-time basis are employed by a small business. And we know that they all face challenging times trying to get their education. Mr. Speaker, businesses, when given a productive working environment with a strong economy, will help train, will help educate, and promote employees to be stronger members of our society. They employ students who are struggling to pay their tuition fees, and they seek out additional occupational therapy and equipment upgrades so all members of society can be contributing their special and unique abilities to our economic landscape. First contract arbitration, Mr. Speaker, just further jeopardizes business ability to make these important investments in our people and in our society. It creates uncertainty, Mr. Speaker. It creates unease, it creates hesitation, and it creates doubt at a time when Nova Scotia needs to be on the top of its game with respect to being investment ready and business friendly. Mr. Speaker, I just heard a comment that somebody else said that already. And the only reason it was said before is because it was right then and it's right now. And as many times as we have to say it until that crowd over there starts to understand how important it is, then, Mr. Speaker, maybe we won't have to repeat it so often. Mr. Speaker, many businesses in this environment, all they need is a moment's hesitation or one reason as to why to choose New Brunswick or Prince Edward Island or Europe to spend their investment dollars rather than Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, first contract arbitration at a time like this is all they need to change their mind. Mr. Speaker, I bet this will be great for labor lawyers. One can only anticipate how they are going to increase with their and need and have high demand for what they need. Mr. Speaker, has the government even considered that this can mean for its own bottom line as groups on the government pay scale who are not unionized but could organize and go to an arbitrator to impose the settlement on the government and further cripple the struggling taxpayers of this province? Mr. Speaker, imagine if we had first contract arbitration in Nova Scotia. All of us in this House know of small businesses in our constituency who would be forced into submission. They would go down the tubes the same way that Treats did because of this first contract arbitration. Mr. Speaker, when the Minister of Finance wants to get up and give his final summation or whatever he plans to do, he will see that that business of Treats went out of business. The company did. Well, you know what, Mr. Speaker? Let's get the Minister of Finance up and let him tell us how the world operates according to him. Because you know what, Mr. Speaker? He has nothing to say when there's any time for him to speak. Oh, Mr. Speaker, you know what? I'm getting caught up in the rabbit tracks, and that's not a good thing. I congratulate him for doing that, though. Because, Mr. Speaker, one thing I gotta say is I respect someone that can do that. And I may not always agree with the Minister of Finance, but I do respect him. But, Mr. Speaker, I would urge the members of this government to stop and consider the impact that this will have on businesses in their own constituencies. But it's more than just the businesses. Think about the people who depend on these businesses for the success of their own livelihoods. We know, Mr. Speaker, that small business employs nearly half of all Nova Scotians. And that's just small businesses. This legislation puts for futures. Mr. Speaker, this legislation puts people's futures at risk. Whether it's in the script or whether it's not in the script, it doesn't matter. We're putting people's lives and their whole livelihood at risk because we're putting in a piece of legislation that nobody wants, that nobody needs. 14 years, and we only had to use 3 times. 3 times that they had to go to conciliation. Why are we so concerned about it is the question that I hear from across the House. It's amazing, Mr. Speaker, how much information they need to get. They don't even understand it. They have to ask us to explain it to them. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? They shouldn't be asking us. They should be asking the people that elected them. They should be asking the people that they represent. They should be asking the small business people who employ over half the population of the working population of this province. That's who they should be talking to. Instead of sitting there and acting like trained seals, they should be going back to their constituencies and asking what it is that we really want and what we really need.
Order. Order. I will ask the honourable member to stick to the debate on the bill. I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'll take your guidance in the good spirit that it was meant. And I do apologize for saying trained. We know, Mr. Speaker, that this legislation puts futures at risk. The future of thousands of businesses, the future of hundreds of thousands of Nova Scotians, and collectively, the future of our entire economy. And our economy, Mr. Speaker, can't take much more of this NDP government. Mr. Speaker, we already have a fragile business environment in Nova Scotia, and the NDP have proven they only know how to make matters worse, not better. From one end of this province to the other, we've seen job losses and we've seen businesses close. Mr. Speaker, we're on shaky ground. Far too shaky to consider a policy as risky as first contract arbitration. Under the NDP, a staggering 8,400, Mr. Speaker, 8,400 Nova Scotians have already been forced to leave the workplace. The NDP cannot truly believe this is the right time to pursue further job-killing policies. Mr. Speaker, this government has proven that they're very good at losing jobs. And Mr. Speaker, with first contract arbitration, we're about to see us lose a whole lot more. So, Mr. Speaker, when this government tells us first contract arbitration won't result in job losses in Nova Scotia, how can we trust them? How can we trust them? This is a government that said that ERs were going to be open 24 hours, that power rates were not going to rise, that the HST wouldn't be raised. We were told by this government that when the federal government decides to go ahead with the MS treatments and allow for trials in MS, that they would be right there on board. Mr. Speaker, we all know that none of this has happened.
They weren't there.
They were not there.
No. Shame.
Mr. Speaker, they also said that they wouldn't run a deficit. And guess what? They have. This is a government who promised better care for seniors, but stopped building long-term care beds. Mr. Speaker, with the ever-growing list of broken promises, why should this NDP government expect Nova Scotians to believe that they will not kill jobs with first contract arbitration? They can't, Mr. Speaker. They can't. Their track record, Mr. Speaker, proves that the families in Nova Scotia can't believe one thing that comes out of the NDP government's mouth. This is a government that's more keen on wasting taxpayer dollars on self-serving and ad campaigns, paying back their special interest funds, and beefing up and getting ready for the next election. They are definitely not acting in the best interests of Nova Scotian families. The people, Mr. Speaker, the people that they were elected to serve. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that one of the key elements and responsibilities government has is to build strong business environment and to attract jobs to our province of Nova Scotia. Well, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the government's track record, it's clear that they are very good at spending taxpayers' money and then at the same time losing jobs. Just look at the Industrial Expansion Fund. This NDP government spent over $100 million in their first year through this fund, and we're still losing jobs. First contract arbitrations sends up a big red flag for businesses who are looking to settle here in Nova Scotia. This legislation, if it could talk, says, don't set up shop here, we're too risky. Don't come to Nova Scotia. This government, Mr. Speaker, is intent on driving jobs away. And how absurd is that, Mr. Speaker? How absurd is it to a province like Nova Scotia to drive people away, to drive jobs away? Nova Scotia should be ready to take advantage of the major opportunity that lies under our nose with the shipbuilding contract. And yet, this NDP government says, nah. I think we'd rather drive away investment and shockwaves of uncertainty through our business community than to do something that is positive. Mr. Speaker, it says a lot about their priorities. At a time when the top priority for each and every member of this House should be on creating jobs, the government has decided that their top priority is to bring forward misguided job-killing legislation that no one even asked for. No one accepts, Mr. Speaker, no one except for their special interest friends at the top of the labor union pyramid. Mr. Speaker, it's become evident that the NDP priorities are not Nova Scotian priorities. Just ask the folks, Mr. Speaker, at DuPage or Bowater, what are their priorities? Ask the people at Yarmouth who lost their ferry, what are their priorities? Ask the people in the call centre in New Glasgow or those at the New Minas Pulp and Paper Mill, what are their priorities? And they will tell you it's having a good climate so they can work, because Nova Scotians want to work. They don't want to be unemployed. They want to be proud and be able to supply good food, good place for their families to live. And Mr. Speaker, I can guarantee you one thing, none of them, not one of them, will say first contract arbitration. They'll say jobs and policies that protect jobs or power rates. Finding ways to reduce their power rates, those are their concerns. Never, never, Mr. Speaker, first contract arbitration. But yet this government knows that this could be one of their one and only term in government. Their only term in government, and they need to appease their special interest friends. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to get the members on the government side of the House to listen to listen to the people that they are elected to represent, to listen to the small business community that have been the driving part of our economy for so many years. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I think at this moment I would like to move adjourn for debate and maybe finish off a little more at a later date.
The motion before the House is for adjournment. All those in favor? Contrary minded? The motion is passed. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that concludes the government's business for tonight. After the daily routine, we will be calling bills for second reading. 94, 95, 96, 98, 100, 102, 104, 106, and 108. I wish you to now rise now, Mr. Speaker, to meet between the hours of noon and 6 p.m.
The motion before the House is that we now adjourn and meet again at the hour of 12 noon until 6 p.m. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Nay. The House is adjourned.
Good speaker.